What does a dyslexic, insomniac atheist do on a regular basis? Stays up all night pondering whether or not there really is a dog. I slept very well last night because I know there's a God, but how I define God might be a little different than how other people define God. See, I define God as service to others. There is a beautiful Jewish concept called tikkun olam, that in Hebrew, translated to English, means repair the world. So I take that not as a suggestion, I take it as an edict, as an obligation, as a responsibility to repair the world. I came across a prayer last year during Rosh Hashanah services, the New Year service at my synagogue. And I was reading in the margins, and they have these additional readings or additional prayers. And this one happened to come. I'm a member of a conservative synagogue, but this happened to come. It was a quote from an Orthodox rabbi. You may have heard of him. His name was Menachem Schneerson. He was the head rabbi of the modern Lubavitch movement for the better half of the mid-1900s to almost 2000. He was a rabbi in Brooklyn, New York, and he was the leader of this Orthodox sect of Judaism. And his quote was simply this: if you see what's missing in the world and what's wrong in the world and a way to repair it, then you have found a piece of the world that God has left for you to repair. But if you only see what's bad and what's ugly in the world and no way to repair it, then it is you who needs repair. That was so profound for me that after 50-something years of doing community service and not really understanding why I do it, kind of clicked for me. And it's because we are left with this obligation to repair the world. Every single one of us that drove here today, that's wearing nice clothing, that has a phone, we're blessed and highly favored. We know the rest of the world doesn't have the same access that we do. And so when we're in a position to give a hand up, we have to give that. When we're in a position to receive a hand up, we're obligated to take it. And I think we've all been in both of those positions. So I'm reminded of this beautiful quote that I heard from a pastor. He said, "The service begins when the sermon is done." So in other words, you don't go to a synagogue or a mosque or a church for the sermon and for the service. The service actually begins once you leave the doors. Which reminds me of a different joke. So this kid goes up to his rabbi and says, "Rabbi, what are all these names on the wall with these little light bulbs next to them?" And the rabbi says, "Well, those are members of the congregation who are no longer with us." And the kid says, "You mean they left, Rabbi? They left the congregation?" "Well, in a way they did, but I don't know how to put this delicately, but they passed away." And the kid says, "Ooh, they died?" He goes, "Yeah, they did." Says, "Well, how come some of them have flags next to their names and some of them don't?" "Oh, well, those are the ones that died in service." He goes, "Oh, I see. Which service, Rabbi? Friday night or Saturday morning?" We all have a calling. Even though I'm Jewish, I went to a Catholic school in Laredo. I had a vocations teacher that asked me in 9th grade, "Howie, what's your calling in life?" I didn't understand what that meant back then. Later on, I came to realize, also listening to my Walkman, that other people called it a purpose or a mission or your why, right? Your purpose. And those of us that are fortunate find it. Those that don't kind of are aimlessly wandering around trying to figure out, is this all there is or is this all there was? That's my motivation. That's how I connect with God. It's what I tell my kids. And they said, "Well, how do you know there is a God?" I said, "How do you know that there isn't?" "Well, I don't see him." I said, "Good point." I said, "But for example, we're standing here in this church, or I tell them at my house, if I said to you, there must have been an architect, very talented, who designed this, nobody would take issue with that. Rex is an artist. If I say there must have been a great artist that put this artwork together, nobody would find that controversial. But why is it that when somebody says that this planet and all the plants and all the animals and all the human beings, each one of you and I, were created by some master orchestrator of the universe, all of a sudden that becomes controversial? And I think it's because God and this concept of God is inconvenient. Because if there is a God, then you're obligated to do something. If there isn't, you're like Southwest Airlines. You're free to move about the country, do whatever you want. But when you deal with this very heavy question of a creator and why this was created and why we are where we are and why sometimes bad things happen and why there are sometimes bad people who make bad things happen, becomes a very heavy question. But ultimately, there comes with a responsibility. It's why the proof that I need, those are the fingerprints that I see that God leaves all over the planet. And it's why, even though I can't prove to anybody, my kids included, that there is a God, I can't disprove that there isn't one. So I'll close with a very simple, uplifting story that, kind of ties into faith lifts, which is what our topic for today. And, faith, I tell people, is not the absence of reason. It's a conclusion we come to after trials and tribulations and life and study, that we come to this conclusion that there must be a God. But how we believe and how we pray and what we believe is ultimately up to us and our perspective. So I leave you with this story. Rabbi has a class, the kids are 12 years old, and he says at the end of the class, and with that, I want you to remember one thing. You should thank God for all the good things that happen in your life. And with the same fervor and the same enthusiasm, you must thank God for all the bad things that happen in your life. With that, have a great weekend. Shabbat Shalom. See you all Monday. Kids all leave the classroom. One boy walks up to his rabbi. He says, Rabbi, he says, I get it. When I got my bicycle, when I got my skateboard, I thank God for all the good things that have happened. But how do I thank him for all the bad things that happened in my life? Rabbi says, look, I'm a very young rabbi, barely 30 years old. I learned that when I was your age, and I'm still dealing with that. So I have no idea how to thank God for all the good things that happened in my life. I'm just telling you what I've been taught. However, there's a very learned man who lives at the end of the town. I want you to go see him, and you should ask him that question because he'll be able to answer it. And so in those days, the further outside of the center of town you lived, the poorer you were. It's not like today, where you live in the Dominion, you're rich because you live far away. If you live close, you're like, ah. But anyway, so the boy sets out to go find this learned man and ask him this very important question. So he takes off walking and he goes past all the homes and out past the parks and past the city dump and the cemetery, and he comes across this one-room shack. Knocks on the door, nobody answers. Keeps knocking, nothing, but he's come a long way, so he's not leaving. Opens the door, he sees a man, probably like your aunt, 99 years old, sitting at a table, wooden table, studying by candlelight with his face in a book. And he says, excuse me, is your name Benjamin? The man looks up, he says, I'm sorry, I can't hear you, I'm almost deaf, can you speak up? And the boy says, is your name Benjamin? He goes, yes, I am, I'm Benjamin. He says, but come closer, I want to see you. My eyes are covered in cataracts, and so I can't see very well. I'm almost blind. And he comes up to the man. He sees that the man's face is covered in boils. And he says, son, why don't you sit down and let me get you a glass of water so you can ask me your question. And he says, well, I'd kind of like to ask my question and leave if that's okay. He says, sure, that's fine. He says, I'd offer you some food, but I'm very poor, so water's all I have. He goes, no, that's quite all right. He says, well, go ahead and ask me your question. He says, my rabbi says I should thank God for all the good things that happen in my life. And with the same enthusiasm and the same fervor, I'm obligated to thank him for all the bad things that happen in my life. And I don't understand that, and he couldn't explain it. So I'll ask you, how do you thank God for all the bad things that have happened in your life? And the man thinks for a bit. And he says, I'm sorry that you came all this way. I can't answer that question, you see, because nothing bad has ever happened in my life. Thank you all.
Thank you, Howie.
Of course.